Howdy, hi, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for stopping by to join me today. I really do appreciate it. My name is Ellie and I'm a witch, and this over here is my teaching assistant Andy, and today is Monday, and on my channel it means it is Misheard history, and today we're going to be talking about the Henrietta Woods court case. So this case has been long forgotten, even by the time of her death. It is one that was novel, though, not just for the time, but looking back to slave reparations as a whole. I don't want to get too ahead of myself, though. Henrietta Wood was born in northern Kentucky, though the date of her birth is unknown. She had been born enslaved to the Toucey family between 1818 to 1820. Now, in 1834, she was sold to a merchant in Louisville and taken away from her family. She was later sold to French immigrant William Misheard, and he took her to New Orleans. William moved back to France in 1844, abandoning his life and his wife Jane. Jane then took Henrietta with her to Ohio, a free state. It was in 1848 that Jane took her to the courthouse to register her as a free woman. Henrietta then picked up domestic labor jobs around Cincinnati, describing this time in her life as the sweet taste of liberty. There was trouble brewing, though. William's daughter and son-in-law, Josephine and Robert White, were still living in Kentucky and disagreed that Jane had the right to free Henrietta, viewing her as their inheritance. Now, in the 1850s, the interstate slave trade was booming, and the Whites thought that it was a perfect time to strike. They just needed someone else to enslave her. For the job, they found Zebulon Ward. Originally from Kentucky, he had relocated to Covington, close to Cincinnati. Now, Zebulon became a deputy sheriff in 1853, and in that spring he was approached and the Whites convinced him to pay $300 for the rights to sell Henrietta, and he could pocket the proceeds. At the time, there were gangs working to capture free black men, women, and children and smuggle them to the South, where they would be sold into slavery. They fraudulently used the cover of the Fugitive State Law of 1850, which required the return of runaway slaves. Zebulon started working with one of these gangs. They were able to locate Henrietta's employer at the time, Rebecca Boyd, who was paid off to help them. In April of 1853, Rebecca tricked Henrietta into taking a ride across the river into Covington, where Zebulon and his men were waiting. Her first 2 nights in captivity were spent locked in different roadside inns. The destination was Lexington, Kentucky, where slave prices had risen thanks to the rise in southern cotton prices. A little additional history for y'all. In 1815, white settlers settling in the lower Mississippi River Valley looked for slaves to cultivate their most profitable crop. To meet demand, slave traders began buying slaves in Virginia, Kentucky, and Maryland, and then selling them to the cotton-producing states. This was referred to as selling them down the river. Henrietta was not going to lay down and take this, though. She was able to tell her story to a sympathetic innkeeper who followed her down to Lexington and filed a lawsuit on her behalf, stating that she was a free woman. Henrietta was not allowed to testify, though, and Zebulon, of course, denied her claims. Now, her freedom papers had been lost in a fire in 1849 at the courthouse. She had a personal copy, but that was confiscated when she was kidnapped. The case was dismissed, and in the eyes of the law, Henrietta was a slave. The lawsuit had prevented Zebulon from selling her for 2 years, but in 1855 he took her to a slave trading firm in Kentucky that did business in Mississippi. Henrietta was put up for sale and sold to Gerard Brandon, one of the largest slave owners in the South. Henrietta was taken to Brandon Hall, where she was one of the between 700 to 800 slaves on his several plantations. She was immediately put to work in the cotton field. She said, "I sewed the cotton, hoed the cotton, and picked the cotton. I worked under the meanest overseers and got flogged and flogged, until I thought I should die." At some point during her time there, she got pregnant and gave birth to her son Arthur, though the father is unknown. After this, she was moved from the cotton fields and started working in the house. In 1863, we got the Emancipation Proclamation, but this was not the end of Henrietta's ordeal. On July 1st, days before the U.S. Army arrived to free thousands of slaves in the area, Brandon forced 300 of his slaves to march the 400 miles to Texas and beyond the reach of federal soldiers. Henrietta was, of course, among them. She was enslaved on a cotton plantation until well after the war ended. Juneteenth, the day in June 1865 when soldiers arrived in Texas to enforce the emancipation, she was not free. In 1866, she was moved to Mississippi with the family, but here she was told she would be working for the family for pay, $10 a month, but she never saw any money. 4 years after the Confederate surrender, she was able to make her way back to Kentucky. She had tried to find family, though it is unclear if she was successful. She did find a lawyer along the way. Harvey Myers decided to file a lawsuit in Cincinnati against Zebulon, who is now a wealthy man living in Lexington. Thanks to the post-war amendments that abolished slavery and extended national citizenship to formerly enslaved peoples, the lawsuit could be held in federal court. Zebulon's lawyers claimed that her previously failed lawsuit proved his innocence. They also claimed that any damages were too far in the past, which was a common argument against reparations. Henrietta wanted to keep fighting, but she had a setback when her lawyer was murdered by a client's husband in an unrelated case. However, in 1878, jurors ruled that Zebulon was responsible to pay Henrietta for her enslavement, which he did in 1879 as confirmed by the National Archives in Chicago. While long forgotten, her case did make national news. Not everyone agreed with the verdict, of course, but she was widely regarded as credible. Newspapers were predicting this would help kick off more lawsuits for reparations. However, the case did not set any legal precedent. This was in large part due to the sum of the reparations. Henrietta had originally wanted $25,000, but was rewarded $2,500, which is about $65,000 today. But the small sum made the courts rule that Zebulon could not appeal the verdict to higher courts. Had he, it likely would be a more well-known case. The judge in the case had told the jury to put aside their ideas of morality and judge based solely on the legality. But then he told them not to award too much money because slaveholders already regretted what they had done. Clearly he was all over the place with his beliefs, but he instructed the jurors to consider the kidnapping heavily, as she had more proof than pretty much any other re-enslaved person that she had clearly been re-enslaved. Henrietta's lawyers in the case were of course suing for lost wages while she was enslaved, but made it a point that the case was for far more than just money. The case was about the evils of slavery itself. By 1878, people were already calling the case a thing of the past or a relic of slavery. However, it was not, but it wasn't ineffectual either. After her case, she and her son moved to Chicago, and using the reparation money, Arthur bought a house where he would start a family, and he also started school. In 1889, he was among the first African-American graduates from what is now Northwestern University's School of Law. He died in 1951 after having lived a fulfilling life as a lawyer. For him and all of their descendants, the trials that Henrietta Wood went through made a long-lasting difference. And that is all that I have for you today. Actually a lot better of a case than I normally give you guys. It was great to see that she actually won in the end. Obviously she went through so much to get there, but to win the case, really surprising, honestly, but an incredible victory, not only for her, but also overall for slavery reparations, which is something you don't learn that much about. And honestly, I wish that her case was more well known because it is a novel and it shouldn't have just kind of been swept under the rug. I'm glad that she got to live her quiet life after the case and she got her money and, you know, she lived with her son and he had a great life and then everybody that came after them. But it is one that I wish that we knew more about it. I had never heard of it before, but researching it was super interesting, and overall, just impressed that she won. The judge pissed me off a little bit with the whole, oh, don't reward too much money because slaveholders are already regretful, boo-hoo. Don't like that, but obviously for the time I get it, kind of. Don't like it, but I can understand it. For stuff coming up tomorrow, Tuesday, my tea time in true crime, it is the Oakland County child killer case. Really sad, really heavy. It's a child killer case, so just bear that in mind. Next week, for Legends Lore, I'm skipping it once again. Sorry. For Misheard History, I will be talking about Emperor Joshua Norton, which was a subscriber suggestion, so thank you for that. Super excited to talk about it. And then for Tea Time and True Crime, I'll be talking about killer nurse Charles Cullen. But yeah, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I appreciate you being here. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye!